The transmission arrived at 03:47 hours Universal Coordinated Time, broadcasted simultaneously across every frequency humanity had ever learned to receive. Radio waves, quantum entanglement channels, gravitational pulse networks. The aliens wanted to ensure their message was heard. Admiral Helena Vance was the first human authority figure to receive the complete translation. She sat in the command center of the United Earth Defense Initiative, her coffee growing cold in her hand as she read the words scrolling across her screen for the third time. "Get me the Secretary General," she said quietly. Then, after a pause that lasted exactly 3 heartbeats, she added, "And someone pour me something stronger than coffee." 3 hours later, the United Nations Security Council convened in emergency session. Representatives from every nation on Earth crowded into the chamber, their faces displaying varying degrees of confusion, fear, and, in a few notable cases, something that looked suspiciously like anticipation. Secretary General Marcus Webb stood at the podium, the weight of 7 billion souls pressing down on his shoulders. He cleared his throat and addressed the assembly. At approximately 03:47 hours this morning, humanity received its first official communication from an extraterrestrial civilization. The message was sent by an organization calling itself the Galactic Covenant, a governing body representing over 400 sentient species spanning 12 galaxies. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Webb held up his hand for silence. The message was translated by our quantum linguistic AI and verified by 17 independent teams across the globe. There is no ambiguity in its meaning. He paused, looking down at the printed transcript in his hands. I will now read the message in its entirety. The chamber fell silent. Even the perpetual hum of the ventilation system seemed to quiet in anticipation. To the species designated human, inhabitants of the third planet orbiting the yellow dwarf star you call Sol, the Galactic Covenant has completed its 500-year observation period of your civilization. After extensive deliberation among all 437 member species, we have reached a unanimous decision. Humanity has been officially classified as a Tier 1 existential threat to galactic stability and peace. Your species demonstrates unprecedented levels of aggression, unpredictability, and adaptive capability. Your rate of technological advancement exceeds all recorded parameters. Your tolerance for environmental extremes, physical trauma, and psychological stress surpasses any species in our database. Most concerning, your complete lack of appropriate fear responses to stimuli that would paralyze or terminate any other known life form. Effective immediately, the following measures are enacted. All Covenant member species are prohibited from making contact with humanity. A quarantine zone has been established around your solar system, extending 17 light-years in all directions. Any ship entering this zone does so at their own risk and forfeits the protection of the Covenant. We hope, for the sake of all sentient life, that you never develop faster-than-light travel. This message will not be repeated. Do not attempt to respond. We are not interested in diplomacy. Signed, the Galactic Covenant High Assembly. For exactly 12 seconds, nobody in the chamber moved or spoke. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone began to laugh. It was the representative from Australia, a weathered man named Jack Morrison, who had survived 3 mining disasters, a crocodile attack, and 2 terms as Prime Minister. His laugh was loud, genuine, and utterly inappropriate for the gravity of the moment. "Did they just call us scary?" Morrison managed between laughs. Did 400 alien species get together and agree that humans are too dangerous to play with? The laughter spread like wildfire. Within moments, the entire chamber had devolved into various expressions of mirth. The Chinese delegate was shaking his head with a smile that suggested pride rather than concern. The Russian ambassador had produced a flask from somewhere and was toasting the air. The British representative was politely suppressing her amusement behind her hand, though her shoulders shook with barely contained laughter. Secretary General Webb let it continue for a full minute before calling for order. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," he said, though even he was struggling to maintain his composure. "We need to formulate an official response." "They said they didn't want a response," pointed out the French delegate. "Since when has that ever stopped us?" replied the American ambassador. This triggered another round of laughter. Admiral Vance, who had been observing from the sidelines, finally stepped forward. "If I may, Secretary General." Webb nodded, grateful for the intervention. Vance faced the assembly with the bearing of a woman who had spent 40 years defending her planet and was thoroughly amused at the idea that she now had confirmation her efforts had been noticed. "In my professional opinion," she began, "the Galactic Covenant has done us an enormous favor. They've told us exactly where we stand in the cosmic hierarchy. They've confirmed that our military capabilities are concerning enough to warrant attention from over 400 advanced civilizations. And most importantly, they've revealed their fear." She let that word hang in the air. "Fear is information," Vance continued. "They're afraid of what we might become if we develop faster than light travel, which means FTL is possible. They're afraid of our aggression, which means they lack it themselves. They're afraid of our adaptability, which means they're specialized and vulnerable to changes they can't anticipate." "What are you suggesting?" asked the Indian delegate. Vance smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just learned that the forest she called home was larger than she had ever imagined. And every tree was afraid of her. "I'm suggesting that we accept their assessment with gratitude and get to work earning it." The vote was unanimous. Part 2. The Response. 6 months after receiving the Galactic Covenant's message, Earth transmitted its official response. It was broadcast on every frequency, every channel, every medium the aliens had used, and several they hadn't. Humanity had spent the intervening months not only composing the message, but developing new transmission technologies that would ensure it reached every corner of the galaxy. The response was simple. "To the Galactic Covenant High Assembly, thank you. We needed the motivation. See you soon." It was signed with the newly designed seal of the United Earth Space Force, adopted by every nation on the planet. The seal depicted a human hand reaching up toward a field of stars and grasping one. In the years that followed, Earth transformed. The perpetual conflicts that had plagued humanity for millennia didn't disappear. They were redirected. The same ingenuity that had created nuclear weapons and biological warfare was now focused on propulsion systems and energy generation. The same aggression that had fueled countless wars was channeled into a species-wide determination to breach the quarantine zone and meet these Covenant species face to face. The United Earth Space Force grew from a theoretical concept to the largest unified military organization in human history. Every nation contributed resources, personnel, and expertise. Old enemies became collaborators. Ancient grudges were set aside, not forgotten, but filed away for later, after they had dealt with the more pressing matter of an entire galaxy that thought it could fence them in. Dr. Elena Vasquez led the FTL Research Initiative. She was a physicist from Argentina who had spent her career studying the theoretical limits of space-time manipulation. The Covenant's message had told her one crucial thing: Those limits could be broken. They didn't say FTL was impossible, she explained to her team on the first day of the project. They said they hoped we never developed it. Hope implies possibility. We just need to figure out how. 7 years later, Elena stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance as it prepared for its first faster-than-light jump. "System check complete," reported Commander James Chen from the navigation station. "All departments report ready." Elena nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration that only a human could feel simultaneously and find motivating. "Admiral Vance, we're ready when you give the order." Helena Vance had aged in the years since that first transmission, but her eyes still held the same sharp intelligence, the same predatory patience. She had been promoted to Fleet Admiral and given command of the entire Space Force, but she had insisted on being present for this moment. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, "how confident are you that this will work?" Elena considered the question seriously. 73% confident it will work. 19% confident it will work but send us somewhere unexpected. 8% confident it will result in spectacular failure. Those odds would paralyze any other species in the galaxy. "I know," Elena smiled. "That's why I love being human. Engage." The Defiance jumped. For exactly 2.7 seconds, the ship existed everywhere and nowhere, stretched across the fabric of space-time like a thought moving at the speed of light. Then it snapped back into normal space, 17 light-years from Earth. Just past the quarantine zone, Commander Chen stared at his instruments, then looked up with an expression of pure wonder. We're actually here. We're in unrestricted space." "Contact!" shouted Lieutenant Commander Reyes from the sensor station. "Multiple contacts bearing 047 Mark 12. I count, Admiral, I count 15 vessels. They're big, really big." On the view screen, the alien ships appeared. They were elegant, crystalline structures that seemed to flow rather than fly, beautiful in a way that was completely alien to human aesthetics. And they were, as Reyes had reported, enormous. The largest was easily 20 times the size of the Defiance. "We're being scanned," Reyes reported. "Active sensors, very powerful. They're getting a complete picture of our ship." "Let them look," Vance said calmly. "We have nothing to hide. Open a channel." "Channel open." Vance stood tall, her dress uniform immaculate, her expression composed. "This is Fleet Admiral Helena Vance of the United Earth Space Force. We come in peace, but we are prepared for alternatives. We wish to open diplomatic relations with the Galactic Covenant." There was no response for a long moment. Then the view screen flickered, and an alien appeared. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but its body was covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with every movement. Its eyes, 4 of them, arranged in a diamond pattern, were a deep purple, and they radiated unmistakable fear. "This is First Speaker Velix of the Covenant Observation Fleet," the alien said. Its translator rendered the words in a calm, synthesized voice that contrasted sharply with the trembling of its scales. You are not supposed to be here. The quarantine was clear. You were to remain in your system." "The quarantine was your decision," Vance replied. "We didn't agree to it." "That is not how the Covenant operates. Species do not choose their own classifications. The Covenant's assessments are binding across all." "All member species," Vance interrupted. "We're not members. We're humans. And we don't recognize the authority of any organization that designates us as threats without ever speaking to us." Velix's scales shifted to a deeper blue. an emotional response the human translators would later identify as acute distress. You do not understand. The assessment was not punitive, it was protective. We were protecting ourselves from you. From us? Vance's eyes narrowed. We've never attacked you. We've never even met you before today. It is not about what you have done. It is about what you are, what you will inevitably do. Velix's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Do you know why the Covenant classified you as a threat? Your message mentioned several factors: aggression, adaptability, lack of fear responses. Those are symptoms. The disease is deeper. Velix seemed to gather itself, its scales settling into a uniform gray that suggested resignation. Every other species in the galaxy evolved to fit a niche. We developed traits that suited our environments and then stopped changing. We reached equilibrium with our worlds and with each other. That is the natural order. That is how civilizations achieve peace. And us? You never stopped changing. Your environment selected for aggression, adaptability, and innovation without limit. You are predators who became the apex species of your world, and then, impossibly, began preying on your own niche. You consume resources, yes, but you also consume ideas, technologies, challenges. When you run out of challenges, you create new ones. Velix's eyes focused on Vance with an intensity that was almost physical. In 500 years of observation, we watched your species go from burning wood for warmth to splitting atoms for power. We watched you develop computing technology that rivals our own, technology we took 50,000 years to create. We watched you survive self-inflicted catastrophes that would have exterminated any other species. We watched you emerge from those catastrophes stronger and more determined than before. Thank you, Vance said. Velix's scales flashed a color that the translators could not interpret. That was not a compliment. We're aware. We're taking it as one anyway. There was a long pause. Then, incredibly, Velix made a sound that the translators identified as laughter, though it was a bitter, resigned kind of laughter. Of course you are. That is precisely the problem. The alien shook its head in a gesture that was surprisingly human. What do you want, Fleet Admiral Vance? What could humans possibly want that would not eventually result in the destruction of everything the Covenant has built? Vance considered the question carefully. She had been briefed extensively for this moment, but all the preparation in the world couldn't fully capture the weight of speaking on behalf of an entire species. We want trade, she said. We want knowledge. We want to travel the stars and see what's out there. We want allies and competitors and challenges worthy of our attention. And if we refuse? Then we'll take what we need anyway. Not because we want to harm you, but because that's what humans do. We push forward. We overcome obstacles. We refuse to be contained. Vance's voice softened slightly. But we'd prefer to do it peacefully. Despite what you believe about us, we're not mindless destroyers. We can cooperate. We can compromise. We can even be friends. But we cannot and will not be caged. Velix was silent for a long time. Its scales cycled through colors that the human translators couldn't begin to interpret. Finally, it spoke. I will convey your request to the Covenant High Assembly, but I warn you, Fleet Admiral, they will not respond as you hope. The fear that led to your classification runs deep. 400 species who have never agreed on anything else all agreed that humanity must be contained. That level of consensus does not change quickly. Then we'll give you a reason to reconsider, Vance said. We're very good at changing minds. The transmission ended. The Covenant fleet held position for another hour, scanning the Defiance from every angle, collecting data on human technology and biology and psychology. Then, without another word, they jumped away. On the water world of Velthrix, the amphibious inhabitants gathered in their submerged parliament to discuss the implications. For 3,000 years, the Velthrians had been the Covenant's premier diplomats, known for their ability to find common ground between even the most incompatible species. Now, for the first time in their recorded history, they faced a challenge that their skills might not be equipped to handle. "The humans want to talk," reported Ambassador Threll, her gill slits fluttering with agitation. "They have sent messages to every Covenant frequency, requesting diplomatic relations." "We have already made our position clear," replied Elder Veshka. "The classification stands." "With respect, Elder, the classification may be insufficient." Threll consulted her data tablet. In the 3 months since their first ship breached the quarantine, humans have launched 47 additional vessels. Their construction rate is accelerating. At their current pace, they will have a fleet of 1,000 ships within 5 years. The Parliament fell silent. 1,000 ships? The entire Covenant maintained a peacekeeping fleet of 12,000 vessels, but those ships were spread across 12 galaxies. Concentrating enough force to counter 1,000 human vessels would require stripping defenses from dozens of systems. "They are building a war fleet," Elder Veshka said. "Possibly," Threll admitted. "Or they are building an exploration fleet, or a trade fleet, or all three simultaneously. That is the challenge with humans. Their intentions are impossible to determine until they act." "Can we stop their expansion?" "Unknown. Our models suggest that direct military confrontation would be." Threll's words were careful, diplomatic, but everyone in the chamber understood their meaning. Humans do not fight the way other species fight. They are willing to sustain casualties that would break any other civilization. They adapt to enemy tactics mid-battle. They view defeat as a learning opportunity rather than an ending. Our war simulations suggest that any victory against them would be Pyrrhic at best. "Then what do you recommend?" Thrill's gills fluttered again, a sign of deep uncertainty. "I recommend that we consider the possibility that our initial assessment was incomplete." "Incomplete?" "We classified humanity as a threat. We did not consider that they might also be an opportunity." On the gas giant harvesting platforms of the Crixian Collective, the insectoid inhabitants received the news with a different kind of concern. The Crixians were traders, not warriors. Their economy depended on the stability of Covenant space, stable trade routes, predictable regulations, reliable partners. The emergence of humanity threatened that stability in ways they were only beginning to understand. "Human vessels have been detected in the outer systems of Sector 47, reported Trademaster Chitter. "They are not attacking, but they are observing, scanning our mining operations, recording our communication frequencies." "What do they want?" asked the Hive Queen through her speaking apparatus. "When we attempted to communicate with them, they responded with what appears to be a trade proposal. They are offering technology in exchange for raw materials." "What kind of technology?" "Their message mentioned something called coffee and heavy metal music. We are still attempting to determine what these terms mean." The Hive Queen's antennae twitched, a gesture of confusion. Is this a threat? "We cannot determine." Human communication is challenging. They seem to blend serious proposals with what our analysts believe may be humor, but we are unable to distinguish between the two. On the crystalline moon of Synthex, the silicon-based architects considered the human phenomenon with something approaching scientific fascination. The architects were the galaxy's oldest spacefaring species, 17 million years of continuous civilization, unbroken by war or catastrophe or internal division. They had observed the rise and fall of countless younger species, and they had developed a comprehensive theory of how civilizations developed. Humans did not fit their models. Their technological progression is logarithmic, observed Architect Prime as it reviewed the data collected from the observation fleet. Each generation builds upon the previous one at an accelerating rate. If this trend continues, they will exceed our technological level within 700 years. 700 years is significant, replied Architect Second. That is time enough to prepare countermeasures. You misunderstand. 700 years is an optimistic estimate. That projection assumes their rate of advancement remains constant. But based on historical data, their rate of advancement is itself accelerating. They could achieve technological parity within 300 years, possibly less. That is impossible. No species develops that quickly. The thermodynamic constraints alone. Humans do not acknowledge thermodynamic constraints. Or rather, they acknowledge them and then proceed to circumvent them through methods we do not fully understand. Architect Prime displayed a holographic simulation. Consider their development of nuclear technology. From first discovering radioactivity to detonating an atomic weapon took them less than 50 years. From atomic weapons to fusion reactors took another 60 years. They are now experimenting with antimatter generation on industrial scales. That is reckless. Antimatter production requires. We know what antimatter production requires. They know what it requires. They are doing it anyway. And according to our intelligence, they have experienced 7 major accidents in their antimatter facilities. 7 accidents? The casualties must be catastrophic. Several hundred deaths, perhaps 1,000. They consider this an acceptable cost of progress. Architect Prime's crystalline form flickered with something that a human might have recognized as admiration. That is what we failed to understand when we classified them as a threat. They do not simply tolerate risk, they embrace it. They calculate the cost of failure and proceed anyway. They treat death as an obstacle to be overcome rather than an absolute limit. That is insane. Yes, it is also why they have advanced faster than any species in recorded history. Insanity may be their greatest competitive advantage. Part 4. First Contact, Proper. The turning point came 3 years after the Defiance's historic jump. The USS Perseverance was conducting survey operations in a system that human astronomers had designated Gliese 667, 72 light-years from Earth. It was one of 200 ships now operating beyond the former quarantine zone, mapping resources, cataloging planets, and generally ignoring the Covenant's increasingly frantic requests that they return to their system of origin. Captain Sarah Okonkwo was reviewing sensor data when Lieutenant Patterson shouted from his station. "Contact! Single vessel, bearing 315 Mark 45. It's not Covenant. Transponder's signature doesn't match anything in our database." Okonkwo was on her feet instantly. Classification? Small. Maybe a third our size. It's... Patterson's voice trailed off. "Captain, it's damaged. I'm reading multiple hull breaches, power fluctuations, life support failing. They're in trouble.
Source of damage?
There's nobody else out here but us.
Okonkwo made her decision in less than a second. Bring us alongside. Prepare for search and rescue.
Captain, we don't know what species is on that ship. They could be dying. Move us in, Lieutenant. That's an order. The Perseverance closed the distance in minutes. As they approached, the alien vessel's distress became more apparent. Great gashes had been torn in its hull, exposing internal compartments to the vacuum of space. Emergency beacons flashed in patterns that needed no translation, universal signals of crisis. "I'm reading 3 life signs," reported Dr. Miguel Santos from the science station, "fading fast. Whatever happened to them, they won't survive much longer." Transporter lock? The damage to their ship is interfering with our targeting systems. We'd need to dock physically. Okonkwo nodded. Patterson, take us in. Santos, prep the medical bay. And someone get security down to the docking port. Friendly or not, we're bringing unknown life forms aboard. 20 minutes later, Captain Okonkwo stood in the Perseverance's medical bay, watching Dr. Santos work desperately to save 3 creatures unlike anything in human experience. They were tall, nearly 3 meters, with bodies that seemed to be composed of interlocking geometric shapes. Their skin was a deep metallic blue, and it was covered in wounds that leaked a thick, silvery fluid. Their eyes, when open, were a brilliant gold, and they tracked the humans moving around them with expressions of what appeared to be absolute terror. "They're stabilizing," Santos reported. "But they're in shock. Not just physical shock, psychological shock. Their stress hormones are off the charts." Can they understand us? Unknown. Their anatomy suggests they have auditory organs, but whether they can process human language. One of the aliens suddenly spoke. Its voice was like metal scraping against metal, but the translator managed to parse its meaning. "Why are you saving us?" Okonkwo approached the injured creature carefully. "Because you were dying. We couldn't just leave you." "You are human." "Yes. You are classified as a threat. You should have destroyed our ship and taken our resources. That is what threats do." Okonkwo frowned. "Is that what you were taught about us?" "It is what all species know. Humans are dangerous. Humans are to be avoided. Humans consume and destroy." "Well," Okonkwo glanced at Dr. Santos, who shrugged. "We do consume quite a bit, but right now we're trying to save your lives. Does that fit your classification?" The alien was silent for a long moment. Then it made a sound that the translator could not interpret, something between a laugh and a sob. "No," it said. "It does not fit at all." The aliens were Meridians, a species from a world in the far reaches of Covenant space. They were explorers by nature, driven by a curiosity that set them apart from their more cautious neighbors. They had come to human space not to observe or quarantine, but to understand. "Our people have debated the human question since your emergence was first detected," explained Elder Kael, the leader of the 3-person crew, once they had recovered enough to communicate properly. "The Covenant's assessment struck many of us as incomplete. We wanted to see for ourselves." "And what happened to your ship?" Okonkwo asked. Kael's geometric features rearranged themselves into an expression of deep shame. "We were careless. We strayed too close to a gravitational anomaly, a phenomenon we did not recognize. The damage was self-inflicted." "An accident?" "A mistake born of overconfidence. We thought ourselves experienced explorers. We were wrong." Okonkwo smiled. If it makes you feel better, humans have been making that mistake for as long as we've been exploring anything. We have a saying, pride goes before a fall. You have a saying for your own overconfidence? We have dozens. We also have sayings for being wrong, making mistakes, failing completely, and still somehow succeeding anyway. Kael's golden eyes blinked in a complex pattern. This is unexpected. The Covenant reports suggested that humans never acknowledged weakness. The Covenant was wrong about a lot of things, Elder. Probably because they never actually talked to us before deciding what we were. There was a long pause. Then Kael spoke again, its voice softer. What will you do with us? What would you like us to do? I do not understand the question. You're injured, but you're recovering. You're far from home, but we have ships that can travel anywhere. You came here seeking to understand humans. We could show you. Okonkwo spread her hands. What would you like, Elder Kal? What would be helpful? Kael was silent for so long that Okonkwo began to worry that something was wrong. Then the alien made that sound again, the one that was somewhere between laughter and tears. In 17,000 years of spacefaring history, Kael said, no alien species has ever asked a Meridian what they wanted. We have been studied, classified, assigned, and managed. But asked? Never. Well, get used to it. Humans ask a lot of questions. So, I am beginning to understand. Kael's form shifted, settling into a posture that conveyed something like resolution. I would like to visit your world, Captain. I would like to see humanity as you see yourselves. And then I would like to return to my people and tell them what I have learned. Okonkwo nodded. Then that's what we'll do. Welcome aboard, Elder Kael. Earth is about 7 weeks away at standard cruise speed. I hope you like coffee. I do not know what coffee is. You will, and you'll probably have an opinion about it. Everyone does. Part 5. The Visit. Elder Kael's arrival on Earth was the first official alien visit in human history. The news networks covered it continuously, and billions of people watched as the Meridian delegation, now numbering 12 after Kael's 2 companions had recovered and 8 additional diplomats had been dispatched from Meridia, touched down at the newly constructed United Earth spaceport in Geneva. The Meridians were fascinated by everything. They marveled at the diversity of human architecture, the gleaming towers of modern cities next to ancient stone cathedrals, the sprawling megastructures of the industrial zones adjacent to carefully preserved wilderness. They asked endless questions about human governance, confused by the concept of competing nation-states that nonetheless cooperated on species-wide projects. You maintain separate governments? Kael asked during a tour of the United Nations headquarters. Even now, after unifying your space program? Especially now, explained Deputy Secretary General Amara Diallo, who had been assigned as the Meridian's primary guide. The competition keeps us sharp. Different nations pursue different approaches to the same problems. Sometimes one approach works better. Sometimes multiple approaches are combined into something new. We argue constantly, but the arguments generate ideas. This seems inefficient. Incredibly inefficient. Also, incredibly productive. We found that the two often go together. The Meridians attended a concert in Vienna, where they experienced human music for the first time. The emotional impact was immediate and overwhelming. Several of the delegation had to leave during the finale of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, their geometric forms vibrating with feelings they had no names for. What was that? Kael asked afterward, its voice barely stable.
That was Beethoven, Diallo said. He wrote that piece 200 years ago. He was deaf when he composed it, couldn't hear a single note of the music he created. He created that without hearing? He imagined it, felt it, built it in his mind, and trusted that it would sound the way he intended. Diallo smiled at Kael's stunned expression. Humans don't let limitations stop us, Elder. We work around them, through them. Sometimes we turn them into advantages. The delegation visited a hospital in Singapore, where they observed human medical technology and, more importantly, human medical philosophy. They watched surgeons performing procedures that would have been considered too risky on any Covenant world, and they witnessed patients who had survived injuries that should have been fatal. "You simply refuse to let him die?" Kael asked, staring at a young man who was walking on prosthetic legs less than 3 months after a mining accident had claimed his original ones. "We don't like losing people," the chief surgeon explained. "Even when the odds are bad, we try. Sometimes we fail, but sometimes we succeed when we had no right to succeed, and those successes make all the failures worthwhile." "Why do you spend so many resources on individuals who cannot contribute at maximum efficiency?" asked one of the younger Meridian diplomats. A question that their species would never have asked if they had understood humans better. It was Kael who answered, turning to their young colleague with something approaching anger. "You have asked the wrong question," Kael said. "The correct question is, why would any species abandon members of their own community? Look at what that child is creating. Listen to what that child is saying. Watch what that child can do. Would you have discarded them simply because they required additional support?" The young diplomat had no answer. Diallo caught Kael's eye and smiled. The elder was learning. The final event of the Meridian visit was unprecedented, a meeting between Elder Kael and the combined leadership of the United Earth Government, broadcast to every screen on the planet. Secretary General Marcus Webb presided, flanked by representatives from every nation and organization that had a stake in humanity's future among the stars. Fleet Admiral Vance was there, along with Dr. Vasquez and Captain Okonkwo. In the gallery, journalists from every country pressed close to their equipment, determined not to miss a single word. "Elder Kael," Webb began, "you came to Earth seeking to understand humanity. You have spent 6 weeks among us. You have seen our strengths and our weaknesses, our achievements and our failures, our unity and our divisions. What have you concluded?" Kael rose to its full height, an imposing 3 meters of geometric form that nonetheless radiated not threat but respect. "I came here expecting to find a species of unconstrained destruction," Kael began. "I was told that humans were dangerous because they lacked the emotional controls that keep other species in balance. I was told that humans were aggressive because they knew no other way of being. I was told that humans were a threat because threat was their nature." Kael paused, its golden eyes sweeping across the assembled humans. "I have found something entirely different. Humans are dangerous, but not because they lack control. They are dangerous because they choose when to exercise control and when to release it. They are dangerous because they make conscious decisions about how to apply their considerable capabilities, and they accept responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. Humans are aggressive, but not because they know no other way. They are aggressive because they understand that passivity leads to stagnation. They push forward not because they cannot stay still, but because they know that stillness is death. Their aggression is purposeful, directed, and ultimately creative. Humans are a threat, but not because threat is their nature.
They are a threat because they refuse to be constrained by the expectations of others. They are a threat to stagnation, to complacency, to the comfortable assumption that the way things are is the way things must be. Kale's form shifted, taking on a configuration that the human observers could not interpret, but which conveyed, to Meridian eyes, absolute certainty. The Galactic Covenant classified humanity as a Tier 1 existential threat. I have come to believe that this classification is correct, but not in the way the Covenant intended. Humanity is a threat to the Covenant's way of existence. You challenge our assumptions about what is possible. You force us to reconsider beliefs we have held for millennia. You demonstrate, simply by being what you are, that there are other ways to live, to grow, to face the universe. Some of my colleagues will view this as confirmation that you must be contained. I view it as evidence that you must be embraced. Coel turned to face Secretary General Webb directly. The Meridian people are prepared to open full diplomatic relations with humanity. We are prepared to trade, to share knowledge, to learn from you, and to teach you what we know. We do not know if other Covenant species will follow our lead, but we believe that, in time, they will have no choice. Because humanity is coming, whether the Covenant is ready or not, and we would rather stand beside you than in your way. The chamber erupted in applause. Webb waited for the noise to subside before responding. Humanity will expand into the galaxy. We will not apologize for this, because expansion is in our nature. But we give you our word that we will expand as partners, not conquerors. We will seek trade before we seek conflict. We will offer friendship before we demand submission. We will remember that the universe is vast enough for all species to thrive. And when we encounter those who would harm the innocent, who would prey on the weak, who would destroy for destruction's sake, we will stop them. Because that is also in our nature. We protect what we value, and we are learning to value a great deal more than just ourselves. The image was broadcast across the planet and, through Meridian relay networks, across the galaxy. The galaxy would never be the same. Part 6. The Response. The Covenant's response to the Meridian-Human Alliance was swift and predictable. An emergency session of the High Assembly was convened, drawing representatives from all 437 member species for the first time in 3,000 years. The agenda had only one item: the human question. First Speaker Velix presided, though its scales now displayed a permanent pattern of stress-related discoloration. "The situation has exceeded our projections," Velix reported to the Assembly. "Human expansion continues at an accelerating rate. They now have over 1,200 FTL-capable vessels operating in formerly restricted space. Their presence has been detected in 47 star systems. And the Meridian defection has opened a diplomatic path that threatens to legitimize their actions." "What do you recommend?" asked the representative from the Crystalline Collective, a species of synthetic intelligences who had evolved from an ancient organic precursor. Velix's scales shifted color, the equivalent of a human sigh. "I no longer have recommendations. The containment strategy has failed. The quarantine is meaningless. Our models did not anticipate the speed of their technological development, or the speed at which other species would choose to engage with them." "Then we must consider military options," said the representative from the Vokrath, a species of ammonia-breathing giants whose martial traditions stretched back hundreds of thousands of years. "We considered military options at the initial assessment," Velix replied. The conclusion was that conflict with humanity would result in casualties that no Covenant species could sustain. That was before they had a fleet, before they had allies, before they began establishing presence in our space. The Vokrath representative's voice boomed through the chamber. Every cycle we wait, they grow stronger. If we are to act, we must act now.
And what action do you propose? A direct assault on their home system? We would need to concentrate 70% of our peacekeeping fleet to guarantee success. That would leave the rest of Covenant space undefended against internal threats.
Then we target their forward positions. We destroy their ships one by one, make expansion too costly to continue. You speak as if humans would simply accept such losses. They would not. They would retaliate. And unlike any species we have fought before, they would not seek a negotiated peace after suffering setbacks. They would escalate. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. The Vokrath representative was not satisfied. You describe humans as undefeatable. That is impossible. Every species has weaknesses. Humans have many weaknesses, Velix agreed. They are biologically fragile. Their technology, while advancing rapidly, still lags behind our most sophisticated systems. Their fleet is small compared to our combined forces. Their supply lines are extended, their logistics untested.
Then why do you hesitate?
Velix's four eyes focused on the Vokrath representative with an intensity that made the giant alien shift uncomfortably. Because their greatest weakness is also their greatest strength. They do not know when to stop. They do not accept defeat as final. They view catastrophic losses as temporary setbacks. They have, in their history, risen from the ashes of their own self-destruction multiple times. If we attack them and fail to destroy them completely, and I tell you now, complete destruction is not within our capability, we will not have defeated humanity. We will have taught them that we are their enemies. And humans, as we are learning, are very creative when it comes to dealing with enemies. The chamber buzzed with agitated conversation. Finally, a new voice cut through the noise.
Perhaps, said the representative from the synthesis, a species of post-biological beings who had uploaded their consciousnesses into a shared quantum network millennia ago. We have been approaching this problem incorrectly.
Velix's scales shifted to a pattern of cautious interest. Explain. We classified humans as a threat because they do not behave like other species. They do not seek equilibrium. They do not accept limitations. They do not stop changing. The synthesis representative's holographic avatar flickered as it accessed vast databases of analysis. But what if their nature is not inherently destructive? What if it is simply different? Different in what way? We assume that all species must eventually reach a state of balance, with their environment, with their neighbors, with themselves. Humans do not seem capable of achieving this state, but perhaps balance is not the only viable model of existence. Perhaps constant change is also sustainable. Constant change is chaos. For us, yes, we evolved to value stability. But consider, humans have survived for 300,000 years in a state of constant change. Their civilizations rise and fall, their technologies advance and are forgotten and are rediscovered. They fight wars, make peace, develop philosophies, abandon them, create art, destroy art, build empires, tear them down. Through all of this, they persist. They even thrive. The synthesis representative paused, allowing the assembly to process its words.
What if humanity is not a threat to be contained, but a force to be channeled? What if, instead of trying to prevent their expansion, we find ways to direct it, to benefit from their unique capabilities while mitigating the risks they pose?
You suggest we integrate them? Velix sounded skeptical. Include them in the Covenant?
I suggest we consider all options, including options that our current frameworks cannot accommodate. If humanity has taught us anything, it is that our frameworks are not as comprehensive as we believed. The debate continued for 73 hours. In the end, no consensus was reached.
But the seeds of change had been planted.
Part 7. Expansion. The decade following the Meridian Alliance was the most transformative period in human history. Ships spread across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. Some were explorers, mapping systems that no human had ever seen. Some were traders, establishing commerce with any species willing to deal with them. Some were colonizers, settling worlds that could support human life, and adapting to worlds that couldn't. The first major human colony outside Sol was established on Kepler 442b, a super-Earth with 1.3 times the gravity, an atmosphere that was almost breathable, and a native ecosystem that was simultaneously fascinating and extremely dangerous. The local fauna has made 17 attempts to eat our surveyors, reported Colony Director Chen Wei during the first quarterly broadcast back to Earth. We've lost 3 people to predator attacks, 2 to toxic plant exposure, and 1 to what appears to be an allergic reaction to the local pollen. Morale has never higher. The viewers back on Earth understood perfectly. This was what humans lived for: the challenge, the struggle, the triumph over adversity. The colony grew rapidly, attracting settlers who wanted to test themselves against an environment that hadn't evolved to accommodate them.
Other colonies followed. Humanity spread to ice worlds and desert worlds, to moons orbiting gas giants, and space habitats constructed in asteroid belts. Each environment was different, each presented unique challenges. And each challenge was met with the same human response: adaptation, innovation, stubbornness, and success.
The Covenant watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. They've established presence in 72 systems, reported Velix to the latest assembly meeting. Populations range from a few hundred researchers to full colonies of several million. They're not expanding according to any strategic pattern we can discern. They seem to be following their curiosity wherever it leads them.
Uncontrolled expansion, muttered the Vokrath representative. Exactly as we predicted.
Not entirely uncontrolled, Velix corrected. They have regulations, laws governing their expansion, limits on what resources can be extracted and how quickly, environmental protections for native ecosystems they consider valuable. Then they do have constraints. Self-imposed constraints. That is the key distinction. They choose their limits, rather than having limits imposed upon them, and they frequently adjust those limits based on new information or changing circumstances. The synthesis representative spoke up. Has there been any conflict with Covenant member species? 2 incidents. In both cases, human vessels encountered Covenant ships in systems that neither side had claimed. Both encounters were resolved through communication. The humans simply asked what the Covenant vessels were doing there and proposed a sharing arrangement.
They asked?
They seem to prefer negotiation to confrontation. Their military capabilities are formidable, but they use them primarily as a deterrent. When they encounter potential conflict, their first response is diplomacy. That does not match their classification as a threat. Velix's scales rippled with frustration. Nothing about their actual behavior matches their classification. That is the core of our problem. We built our entire response strategy on an assessment that is increasingly difficult to justify.
Then, perhaps the assessment should be revised. The suggestion came from an unexpected source, the representative from the Threll, a species of energy-based beings who rarely participated in political discussions. Their presence in the assembly was largely ceremonial. They had evolved beyond the concerns of physical species millennia ago. "You cannot simply revise a covenant classification," Velix protested. "The protocols are clear. A Tier 1 designation requires unanimous agreement to downgrade."
Then perhaps we should seek that agreement. The Threll representative's energy form pulsed with soft light. I have observed humanity from a perspective that most physical species cannot access. I have sensed their emotional frequencies, felt the patterns of their collective consciousness. They are complex, more complex than any species in this assembly, including my own.
Complex does not mean peaceful. No, but it means adaptable, capable of change. They can be peaceful when peace serves their interests, aggressive when aggression is required, compassionate when compassion is called for. They are not locked into any single mode of behavior. That is precisely what makes them dangerous. That is what makes them valuable. The Threll representative's light intensified. Consider, every species in the Covenant has found its niche, its equilibrium, its role in the galactic order. We have achieved stability at the cost of flexibility. We can respond to changes, but we cannot initiate them. Humans are different. They initiate change constantly. They create chaos, yes, but they also create novelty, new technologies, new philosophies, new possibilities. If we could learn to work with them instead of against them, we might gain access to capabilities that have atrophied in our own societies. The Assembly considered this perspective in silence. It was, they realized, a fundamentally different way of viewing the human problem. Not a threat to be contained, an asset to be cultivated. The shift in Covenant attitudes toward humanity was gradual but unmistakable. More species followed the Meridian example, establishing tentative diplomatic relations with the United Earth government. Trade agreements were negotiated. Cultural exchanges began. The quarantine zone, never formally dissolved, became increasingly irrelevant as Covenant ships began crossing it regularly. Humanity, for its part, proved to be enthusiastic partners. They shared their technology freely, not the military applications, but the innovations that improved quality of life. Their medical advances saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. Their entertainment, music, visual art, literature spread through the galaxy like wildfire, awakening dormant aesthetic sensibilities in species that had forgotten they possessed them. And then the crisis came. The first reports were confused. A Covenant outpost on the edge of explored space had gone silent. Investigation revealed that the outpost had been destroyed, not by natural disaster, but by attack. The attackers were unknown. Over the following weeks, more outposts were hit. Trade vessels disappeared. Entire colonies were found dead, their inhabitants killed by weapons that left no survivors and few clues. The Covenant convened an emergency session. "The pattern is clear," reported Velix, who had aged visibly under the stress of the ongoing crisis. "Someone is hunting Covenant species. The attacks are systematic, targeting our weakest points. Whoever they are, they have studied us carefully." "Do we have any leads on their identity?" One vessel escaped an attack and returned with sensor data. The attackers are organic, vaguely humanoid, and equipped with technology that exceeds our own. Velix displayed a holographic image captured from the surviving vessel. "We have no record of this species in our database. They appear to be from beyond known space." The Assembly reacted with a mixture of fear and confusion.
The Covenant had believed that they had mapped the entirety of the reachable universe. The idea that unknown civilizations existed beyond their borders, civilizations with technology superior to their own, was deeply unsettling.
"How do we respond?" asked the Vokrath representative, who, for once, seemed more worried than aggressive. "We have 3 options," Velik said. "First, we can strengthen our defenses and wait. The attacks have focused on peripheral targets. Our core systems remain secure. Second, we can attempt to contact the attackers and negotiate. They have not responded to any of our communication attempts, but perhaps different approaches might succeed."
And the third option? Velix hesitated. Its scales shifted through several colors before settling on a pattern that conveyed deep reluctance. "We can ask humanity for help." The reaction was immediate and divided. Some representatives recoiled at the idea. Others nodded thoughtfully. The Meridian delegate spoke up immediately. "Humanity has been asking to participate in Covenant security discussions for years. They have offered their military capabilities to help defend against external threats. We have consistently refused." "For good reason," someone interjected. "If we invite them into our defense structure, they will have access to our weaknesses, our strategies, our most sensitive information." "They will also have motivation to protect us," the Meridian delegate countered. "Right now, these attackers, whoever they are, have no reason to view humanity as separate from the Covenant. If they learn that humans are our allies, they may hesitate to engage them. Or they may view humans as targets."
Humans, the Meridian delegate said quietly, would consider that a challenge rather than a deterrent.
The debate continued for hours. In the end, the decision was made. A message would be sent to Earth, requesting consultation on the crisis.
Not alliance, not military cooperation, just consultation. It was a step that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. The human response was characteristically direct.
Admiral Marcus Chen arrived at the Covenant capital world 2 weeks after the request was sent, accompanied by a delegation of military strategists, intelligence analysts, and diplomats. His ship, the USS Resolution, was one of the largest vessels humanity had ever built, a deliberate show of capability that was lost on no one.
"Thank you for inviting us," Chen told the assembly. "We've been following reports of the attacks with great interest. Our analysts have some theories about who might be responsible." "You have theories?" Velix was surprised. "We have provided you with no intelligence beyond the basic facts."
"You haven't. But we've been conducting our own observations." Chen smiled slightly. "You didn't really think we'd stop exploring just because there might be something dangerous out there, did you?" He activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy, but a map that extended far beyond Covenant borders. "For the past 5 years, we've had deep space probes operating in regions your species have never visited. We've been mapping, cataloging, and, occasionally, making contact with civilizations you didn't know existed." The assembly reacted with shock. "You have been conducting unauthorized exploration beyond Covenant space?" "Beyond Covenant space means beyond Covenant authority. We weren't breaking any rules. There were no rules to break." Chen's tone was matter-of-fact. "In any case, our probes discovered these attackers about 18 months ago. We've been studying them ever since." "You knew about them? You knew and you didn't warn us?" "We warned you when we had actionable intelligence. It took time to gather data, analyze patterns, and develop a comprehensive assessment." Chen's expression grew serious. "They call themselves the Hierarchy. They're from a region approximately 40,000 light-years from here. They've been expanding for the past 10,000 years,
absorbing or destroying every civilization they encounter.
Why are they attacking us now?
Because they've run out of easy targets. The species in their immediate region have been conquered or exterminated. Now they're looking for new territories, and they found the Covenant.
Velix's scales shifted to a color that conveyed horror. How strong are they?
Strong. Their technology is roughly equivalent to yours in most areas, superior in a few. Their population is massive, at least 100 billion individuals spread across thousands of worlds. And they have a unified command structure that allows them to coordinate attacks across vast distances.
Then we cannot defeat them.
Chen shook his head. Alone, the Covenant cannot defeat them. Your species evolved for stability, not conflict. Your military capabilities are designed for peacekeeping, not war.
And humanity?
Chen's smile was thin but confident. Humanity evolved for conflict. Our entire history has been a series of wars, against our environment, against each other, against limitations we refuse to accept. We've been preparing for a fight like this since before we knew the galaxy existed.
You are offering alliance?
We're offering partnership, a full military alliance between humanity and the Covenant, with shared command structure, integrated forces, and mutual defense obligations. Chen looked around the assembly, meeting the eyes of representatives from species who had spent centuries fearing his kind. We know you don't trust us. You classified us as an existential threat. And honestly, in your position, we might have made the same call.
But the threat you imagined was never going to come from us. We don't want to destroy the Covenant, or conquer your worlds, or replace your civilizations with our own. We want allies, partners, friends. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and we want that something to survive. The hierarchy doesn't share those values. They see other species as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. They will not negotiate. They will not coexist. They will not stop until they have consumed everything in their path.
So you can continue to face them alone, with militaries that were never designed for this kind of fight. Or you can accept our help, the help of a species that was literally built for war, and give yourselves a chance to survive.
Chen spread his hands. The choice is yours, but I would recommend choosing quickly. The hierarchy isn't going to wait while you debate.
The assembly voted within the hour. For the first time in Covenant history, a non-member species was granted full military alliance status. The war for galactic survival had begun.
Part 9. The War.
The first major engagement of the war occurred in the Tethys system, a Covenant outpost that the hierarchy had targeted for conquest. A fleet of 300 human vessels arrived just as the hierarchy attack force began its assault.
Admiral Chen commanded from the bridge of the Resolution.
All ships, this is the Admiral. You've trained for this. You've prepared for this. Now it's time to show the galaxy what humanity can do. He paused, then added, "Weapons free. Let's introduce ourselves." The battle was short, brutal, and decisive. The hierarchy forces had expected to face Covenant defenders, species evolved for peace, whose combat doctrine emphasized defense and withdrawal. Instead, they encountered human warships that attacked without hesitation, that pressed forward even when taking damage, that seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses. The human fleet carved through the hierarchy formation like a knife through paper. Weapons designed by species who had been fighting for their entire existence proved devastatingly effective against enemies who had never faced a peer competitor.
Human pilots, trained from childhood in the arts of conflict, outmaneuvered opponents who had grown complacent from centuries of easy victories. When the battle ended, 92 human vessels had been destroyed. The entire hierarchy attack force, 400 ships, had been eliminated. The news spread across the galaxy. "They fought like nothing we've ever seen," reported a Covenant observer who had accompanied the fleet. "They took losses that would have broken any other species, and they kept fighting." When ships were too damaged to continue combat operations, their crews ejected into space and waited for rescue while continuing to provide tactical data to the surviving vessels. When rescue was impossible, they aimed their dying ships at enemy targets and accelerated. They sacrificed themselves? Willingly, even eagerly. I heard communications from human pilots whose ships were destroyed. They were laughing while they died, as if combat was a game they had waited their entire lives to play. The war lasted 7 years. It was not a war of grand campaigns or decisive battles, but of attrition and adaptation. The hierarchy's initial advantage in numbers was gradually eroded as humanity mobilized resources on a scale the galaxy had never witnessed. Earth's industrial capacity, already impressive, was expanded by orders of magnitude. New shipyards were constructed in asteroid belts across human space. Weapons research accelerated, producing innovations that even the Covenant's oldest species found remarkable. And humanity's allies grew. Species that had initially joined out of necessity discovered that fighting alongside humans was transformative. The Vokroth, who had been humanity's most vocal critics, became their most enthusiastic partners after seeing human warriors in action. The Velthrians contributed their diplomatic expertise, forging alliances with neutral species who might otherwise have remained on the sidelines. Even the Synthesis, who had transcended physical conflict millennia ago, provided tactical algorithms and strategic simulations that proved invaluable. The turning point came in the 5th year of the war, when human intelligence analysts discovered the location of the hierarchy's homeworld. Admiral Chen, now Fleet Admiral Chen, commander of all Allied forces, presented the findings to the combined leadership. "We have a choice," he said. "We can continue fighting a defensive war, grinding down hierarchy forces one engagement at a time. This approach will eventually succeed, but it will take decades. Millions more will die. Or we can strike at their heart, take the fight to their home world, end this war in one decisive action." "The risks would be enormous," observed Velix, who now served as the Covenant's primary military liaison. "If the attack fails, we will have expended resources we cannot replace. The hierarchy will know our capabilities and will adapt. If the attack succeeds, the hierarchy will be broken. Their command structure is centralized. If we destroy their leadership, their remote forces will lose coordination. The war ends." The decision was made. The largest fleet ever assembled, 12,000 ships representing every allied species, set course for hierarchy space. The Battle of Hierarchy Prime lasted 47 hours. The enemy fought with everything they had. Billions of hierarchy soldiers defended their world, supported by orbital platforms, automated weapon systems, and every ship their civilization could deploy. They knew that this battle would determine the fate of their species, and they gave no quarter. Neither did humanity. Admiral Chen commanded from the center of the Allied formation, his ship taking damage from multiple angles as the battle raged around him. He watched his fleet suffer losses that would have been unthinkable before the war. Thousands of ships destroyed, hundreds of thousands of crew members killed. And still they fought. "Push forward," he ordered, his voice hoarse from hours of continuous command. "They're weakening. I can feel it. push forward."
Human vessels led the assault, creating openings that Allied ships exploited. Vokrath warriors boarded enemy platforms, fighting hand-to-hand in conditions that would have killed any less resilient species. Meridian navigation specialists guided strike teams through enemy defenses with precision that approached prescience.
And when the final defensive line fell, when human Marines stormed the Hierarchy Command Center and terminated the enemy leadership, the war was over. The surviving Hierarchy forces, suddenly without direction, scattered. Some surrendered. Others fled into deep space. Still others fought to the death rather than accept the impossible reality. They had been defeated by a species they had never even heard of before the war began.
Admiral Chen stood on the surface of Hierarchy Prime, surrounded by the ruins of a civilization that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, some of it his own, and his face bore the exhaustion of a man who had given everything he had.
But he was smiling.
"Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the cameras broadcasting his image across the galaxy, "this war is over. The Hierarchy has been defeated. Their threat to galactic civilization has been eliminated."
He paused, looking around at the Allied soldiers gathered behind him. Humans, Vokrath, Meridians, Velthrians, and a dozen other species who had fought and bled and died together.
This victory does not belong to humanity alone. It belongs to every species that chose to stand with us, every soldier who refused to surrender, every civilization that bet its future on the hope that together we could overcome any enemy. We have proven that hope was justified, and we have established a truth that will echo through history. The galaxy is not a collection of isolated species, each struggling to survive alone. It is a community, a family, and families protect each other.